Let me say a word of welcome again to our guest and explain to you that in January of every year, I take 1 or 2 Sundays and I give what we call the State of the Church Address or the Church Health Report. We look back at what God has accomplished through us in the previous year, and then we begin to look forward to where God is leading us in the coming year. And so, if you showed up here and you were just like, I want to find out what this church is about, you picked a really good Sunday for that, because I'm going to share some things that really do explain what Huffman Baptist Church is all about. Last Sunday, I revealed a model of a way of looking at the constituencies that make up Huffman Baptist Church. You see that model up on the screen right now. And the neat thing about this is, it starts with the core, which is our leadership, and then the committed, which includes the core, then the broader church, people who maybe have disengaged through the years, but that also includes the committed and the core. And so what you see is as you move further out in those concentric circles, each circle that is behind the other includes all of the circles that is in front. And so by the time you get to that last circle, which is our community, what we talked about up here a few moments ago, there's more than 400 souls that God has entrusted to us, that we have the opportunity to shepherd, that we have the opportunity perhaps to make disciples, we have the opportunity to encourage, to be there for them, to be the hands and the feet of Jesus for those 400 individuals. And that includes you. That includes me. We are all a part of that broader community. And so as we continue moving towards all of those communities, here's something that's really fun for me. For the first time in a long time, I know for the first time in 4 Januaries, because this is my 4th January, and I suspect that it goes back before that. But for the first time in a very, very long time, we are able to stand here or sit here today expecting that God is going to show up in an incredible kind of way this coming year. So like last year, I prayed, I said, Lord, would you just send us one family from the next generation, one family with children, and look what God has done. In previous years, we said, Lord, continue to prepare us for what you want us to do. Lord, give us some semblance of success. Just a little bit will do. But now we stand here right now, coming off of a 2022 with new people, new church members, new baptisms, success financially. And so we enter 2023 with opportunities to move forward. And so I fully anticipate that next January, if the Lord allows me to stand here one more time and deliver a church health report, a state of the church report, I don't expect to share how we've made some incremental progress here or there. That's not what I expect to share. Instead, I expect to report how God has blessed us immeasurably in our efforts to make disciples who gather, grow, and go to make Jesus known across the street and around the world. I want to invite you to open your Bibles to Deuteronomy chapter 1. We are back in Deuteronomy 1, and I want you to look specifically at verse 19. Because last week we looked at how Moses was reminding them of how he had told them that they sent to go. It was time to go into the land of God's promise. So look at verse 19. They set out from Horeb, which was where they were encamped, where God had delivered the 10 Commandments to Moses. They stayed there for an extended time, and then they set out from Horeb and went through all that great and terrifying wilderness that you saw on the way to the hill country of the Amorites, as the Lord our God commanded us, and we came to Kadesh Barnea. And I said to you, you have come to the hill country of the Amorites, which the Lord our God is giving us. So understand what's happened. When God told Moses to tell the people, it's time for you to leave Mount Sinai, to leave Mount Horeb, same place, and to go into the hill country, they had to go through the wilderness, that great and, as he said, great and terrifying wilderness. So it was not an easy journey. They had to go through that wilderness in order to get to the land of God's promise. The hill country of the Amorites, that was the gateway to the promised land. So it was right there in front of them. Like us today, they stood right there looking at it. The only thing they had to do was move forward. Indeed, God had placed it before them, and God says, I'm giving it to you. All you have to do is move into the land of God's promise. So what did they do? How did they respond to that command to go into the land of God's promise? Well, they acted like a bunch of Baptists. They appointed a committee. See, they're Baptists. They appointed a committee. Now, they didn't call it a committee. They called them spies. But they appointed a committee. And the committee was supposed to go up to investigate and come back with a strategy. That was their point. That was their purpose. It was like a strategic planning team in a church. Their job was to come back with a strategy. At least that's what they said when they asked Moses to appoint the committee. Look at verse 22. He said, "Then all of you came near me and said, 'Let us send men before us that they may explore the land for us and bring us word again of the way by which we must go up and the cities into which we shall come.'" So they're asking for a plan. They're asking for a strategy. Now, in the Numbers account of this same incident, we're told that those 10 of those committee members, they sent 12, 10 came back with a negative report. And 2 came back with a positive report. Now, it wasn't a stick your head in the sand. They saw the same thing that the other 10 saw. They knew it was going to be difficult. They came back and said, yeah, there are giants in the land, but the God that is with us is greater than the God that is there. And so we must move forward. Only 2 said we must move forward. Moses doesn't reference that specifically here in the Deuteronomy account. Remember, this is 40 years later. They are now at the point where they are going to enter the promised land, only they've been wandering for 40 years, and they're not going up through the hill country of the Amorites. They're coming across the Jordan River. And so it's 40 years later, Moses reminded him. He doesn't explicitly state that, but he implies it. But Moses does something else in this account. He places the responsibility for the failure to go up squarely on the shoulders of the people. Verse 26. He said, "Yet you would not go up, but rebelled against the command of the Lord your God. And you murmured in your tents and said, because the Lord hated us, he has brought us out of the land of Egypt to give us into the hand of the Amorites to destroy us." In other words, God didn't bring us here to bless us. God brought us here to destroy us. If we do what God's telling us to do, then there's no way that we're going to make it. In spite of God's command, in spite of Moses' encouragement, they didn't believe the Lord. Therefore, they did not go up. Now, here's the really crazy thing about this. In spite of everything that God had done in bringing them to this point, think about this. Bringing them out of Egypt. Just remember how that all got started. Remember the plagues that God used to try to get Pharaoh's attention? And then the last plague where the death angel passed over all of Egypt, they knew, it's like they're saying, God, we know that you spared our children when the death angel crossed over Egypt. God, we know that you parted the Red Sea for us to cross over on dry land. And then you used that same Red Sea to drown the Egyptians who were pursuing us. God, we know all of that. God, we know that you brought water from a rock when we were thirsty. God, we know that you provided us with something to eat. We got tired of eating it, but you provided it every day while we were coming to this point. God, we know that your presence has been before us, bringing us to where we are. Everywhere we've gone, we were following either the pillar of fire or the cloud. God, your presence has been here. We know all of that. But God, we're not sure that you're going to do for us now what you did for us then. Church, we are at a critical point in the life of this church. Like Israel, we have passed through that great and terrifying wilderness. It's been a time of transition. Throw in COVID in the middle of it, and yet we're still here. And we're not just still here, we are here. The hill country of the Amorites is right before us, and every one of you has made the journey. In fact, I am amazed at how few of us that were here when I got here 3.5 years ago. I am surprised at how few of our members have become what a friend of mine calls vision casualties. A vision casualty is someone who's been a part of a church for a long time, and then when the church begins to go in a different direction, they say, I'm not sure. That may not be for me. A vision casualty is someone who says, I don't like the destination, or maybe I'm not willing to do what it takes to get to the destination. We've had a few of those over the past 3 years. But you are still here. You've persevered. Going back to our banners up here, our core values, you've persevered. You've remained generous. You've shown a spirit of innovation and a willingness to adapt and change when necessary. And you've proven over and over again your partnership in the gospel. I remember the day that I stood in this very spot. It was actually literally 3.5 years ago this weekend. It was the 3rd Sunday of July, if I'm remembering correctly. And I explained to you that the journey forward was going to be difficult. In fact, I had a cousin that visited with us that morning, kind of slipped in the back, and he called me as I was leaving. He said, well, if they don't know what's coming, they weren't listening. Because I painted a pretty accurate picture of what I felt like. In fact, I remember specifically saying, some of you who were so excited that you've got a pastor here this morning, in 6 months you're going to hate my guts. Because we're going to have to do some things that are different, that takes us through that wilderness that is terrifying, and we're headed toward a destination that looks very different than what Huffman Baptist Church looked like 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And I specifically remember saying at the end of that message, if you're not willing to do what is necessary, please vote no at the end of the service. I've never done that to a church. I told a friend of mine I did that. He said, you did what? I said, I wanted to know where I stand. I wanted to know where the church stood. I wanted to know, did they really want to move forward? And can I tell y'all, that is the only unanimous call that I have ever received in any church that I've ever gone to. There was not one single no vote. I realize that doesn't necessarily mean it was unanimous, because there may have been somebody that just said, I'm not voting. But at least of those who voted, it was unanimous. Not a single no vote. And what I was doing in that, I was basically saying to you, guys, if we're going to move forward, we're going to be partnering for the sake of the gospel. We're going to be doing this together. And I'm so excited and so incredibly grateful that you have embraced and continue to embrace that value of partnership for the sake of the gospel. And so today, we are leaving that wilderness and preparing to go up into the hill country of the Amorites. That's what 2023's got to be. I'd like to say that you've done the hard part and the rest is going to be easy, but we know better. The truth is, yes, you've done the hard part, and the rest is going to be fruitful. It may still be hard, but it's going to be fruitful. One of the things that I've prayed for at every church that I've ever pastored is that I would have the privilege to see the fruit of our labor, that God would allow that. That's my prayer right now. It's my prayer for me. It's my prayer for you, that God would allow us to see the fruit of our labor, not for our gratification, but for His glory. Amen. As I shared with you last week, this journey is a continuation of the next chapter, revealed on January of 2020. A continuation of that next chapter in which we will become a family of churches who are sending transformed people to make Jesus known across the street and around the world. We've not started a new chapter. We're just continuing the same chapter, continuing to turn the pages. And what I want to do for you this morning is to give you kind of a summary of what those next pages might reveal. I say might reveal because I've discovered, especially over the last 3 years, that what I think those pages are going to reveal in January, by the time I get to the end of the section that we're in, God's done something completely different. And so I'm sharing with you this morning what those next pages might reveal in 2023. We're going to continue to move forward to the core. Remember, as I shared with you last week, the core represents our leadership. It's church staff, it's deacons, it's members of our administrative leadership teams, it's small group leaders, Sunday school teachers. Back in verse 9 of Deuteronomy chapter 1, Moses admitted, he said, I am not able to bear you by myself. Now, he wasn't saying I'm sick and tired of you. He's just saying the burden is too great. And church, I can tell you the burden of leadership, I don't care if you're trying to shepherd 10 people, 20 people, 200 people, 400 people, the burden of leadership is great. And is nothing that one person can do alone. Moses said, choose for your tribes wise, understanding, and experienced men, and I will appoint them as your leaders. The core membership of Huffman Baptist Church are those who bear that burden of leadership. And I'm incredibly thankful for each of you. Today we have 31 church members who are actively involved in core leadership. Over the past 3 years, we've lost some of these leaders. Some have moved away, some have passed away, some have stepped aside so that others can step in. But we're also starting 2023 with some new core leaders, including one new member of the personnel team and one deacon who's never served in that capacity. And so I want to invite you to come back. Actually, come back every week, but I want you to mark on your calendars Sunday afternoon, the 29th of January. We'll have our quarterly family meeting in here, and at the same time, we will ordain Reginald Gardner as a deacon. That'll be an exciting time, and so I hope that you'll come back for that. So we have, for the first time in a very long time, we're entering into 2023 with a full slate of deacons at Huffman Baptist Church. I think that's progress. During the course of this next year, Bill and I will be working with our administrative leadership teams to develop a plan to expand each leadership team from 3 to 4 members and then implement a rotation system. As God continues to send new people to Huffman, we desire to make room at the core for those who show leadership capacity. One of the things I'm excited about in this course of this next year is that we've included funding in our budget for staff and leadership development. That's incredibly important as we add new staff members who may not have grown up in a church environment like ours, as we try to train them and bring them into the culture that we have established here with our staff leadership, but also helping our lay leadership as we continue to establish and maintain the culture that reflects these core values of generosity and partnership and innovation and perseverance. Moving forward with the core will allow us to move forward to the committed. Remember, the committed are church members who are engaged with the vision and values of the church. As of today, there are right at 150 people who fall into this constituency, including the 31 who make up the core leadership. For the past 25 years, though, that number has consistently declined year after year after year. And as that number declined, also the financial capacity of the church declined. In fact, we have models that predicted the decline of membership and the decline of finances, and we planned accordingly for several years so that we knew that the numbers were doing this. Can I tell you that for the first time in a long, long time, maybe 25 years, for the first time, it is highly likely that if we move forward with everything that we're talking about here, there will be more in the committed group this time next year than are here today. Amen. To those of you who are among this group, and that includes really everyone in the room who are members of Huffman Baptist, I simply say thank you. Thank you for your partnership in the gospel. Thank you for your generosity in the gospel. Thank you for your innovation, that flexibility to adapt and change. Thank you for your perseverance. Stay connected. Keep on serving. Don't bail on us now. The promised land is right in front of us. I read a story this morning, actually. I opened up a blog that I read, and the guy was writing about a fellow who was on a mountain climbing expedition in the French Alps. And so he was with a group, and they had a guide, and the guide told them, said, now look, where we're going, you only take the things that you absolutely have to take with you. You're not going to be able to make it if you try to take a lot of stuff in your pack. So if you don't absolutely have to have it, leave it behind. Well, this guy one guy in the group had grandiose plans of what he was going to do. He was not a Baptist, and so he had in his backpack a bottle of wine and a wheel of cheese because he wanted to get to the top and he wanted to be able to sit there and soak it all in. And he also had a camera with all of the different lenses because he wanted to be able to take pictures and savor the experience for years to come. Well, as they made their way up the mountain, he got slower and slower and slower. Finally, the guide came back to him and said, look, if you don't get rid of that stuff in your pack, you're not going to make it to the top. And the guy says, I'm not going to get rid of it. I'm going to keep going. And so for a little while longer, he continued to get slower and slower. Finally, he said, I can't go any further. And so he just sat down and he told everybody, said, y'all go on up. I'll catch you when you come back down. Don't be that guy. Don't be that guy who sits down and doesn't make it to the top. You don't want to be the one who comes back to a Huffman homecoming 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and you get to hear from everybody else what the top looked like. You're here for the taking. You're here for the fruit that is right here in front of us. Don't stop now. Don't stop now. During 23, we'll continue to expand the opportunities for spiritual growth and development by adding new discipleship opportunities, continuing our focus on senior adult ministry. Richard and Susie are doing an incredible job of providing leadership. We'll add opportunities for you to serve as we move forward to the congregation, to the church, to the community, and ultimately to making Jesus known across the street and around the world. The reality is that we can't effectively go to any of the other constituencies without you. The core enables us to move forward with the committed, and the committed help us to move forward to the church. Now remember, the church includes all of the core, all of those who are committed, but it also includes another group of people who have, for whatever reason, disengaged from the vision and the values of the church. At some point, they believed that God was placing them in His body here at 700 Huffman Road according to God's design. But for whatever reason, they have disengaged. Now some of them, quite honestly, are homebound or in nursing homes, and they're not able to engage. But the reality is that of the 226 souls who make up this group, who are members of Huffman Baptist Church, many of our homebound are part of the committed. Even though they can't be here, they're watching online. I'm told they're continuing to financially support the church. So they're in that committed group. That's incredible. Over the course of this next year, every one of us who fall into that 226, that includes those of you who are members of the church sitting in this room, those who are members watching online, those who are members that are not watching online, they're not in the room, they're disengaged. Every one of those 226 is going to have a face-to-face encounter, engagement with a pastoral staff member at least once. The staff's going, what? We haven't talked about this. Our goal there is to encourage and engage, because ultimately the idea of a disengaged church member is an oxymoron, right? If church membership is the idea that God has placed us in His body according to His design, if you saw an arm sitting off on the side of the road, you would assume that arm is dead, right? And if it's severed, you've got a very short amount of time to get it back attached to the body, or it is dead and it's of no value. It's just dead. And so the goal ultimately is that the committed and the church are exactly the same. There's no difference in those two numbers. There'll always be homebound folks. There'll always be people who cannot be engaged with the life of the church, but that doesn't mean that we forget them. It doesn't mean that we ignore them. Now, for many of you, that face-to-face encounter with a staff member may take place in the hallways here at 700 Huffman Road. It may take place as you stand around the pews at the beginning of a worship service or the end of a worship service, or it may take place around the tables in the fellowship hall. It might even be in the parking lot. But for those who are unable to be here or those who are not here, we will go to where you are. We will love you. We will encourage you. And for those who are able, but who for whatever reason are not engaged with the vision, we'll love you too. As I shared in January of 2020, God will hold us accountable for how we shepherd the sheep of his pasture. Amen. Everyone who is a member of Huffman Baptist Church, we collectively are responsible for them. And if we allow a sheep of God's pasture to stray away from the fold, and we don't do everything within our power, we can't make the sheep come back to the fold, but if we don't do everything within our power, everything within our ability, I believe we'll give an account to God for that. So God's placed every one of those 226 sheep, every one of those 226 members in his body according to his design. So we want to engage the unengaged, to shepherd their hearts toward the heart of God. Now that we have a full deacon council, we'll assign every one of our homebound. By the way, many of those homebound, as I shared, are committed church members. They are engaged with the vision and values. They watch online. They financially support. But now that we have a full deacon council, we're going to assign every one of our homebound members, as well as our disengaged members, to a deacon to assist the pastoral staff in shepherding the sheep of God's pasture. So as we move forward with our entire church family, then we will also move forward to what I call the congregation. You may remember my definition of this group are those who are engaged with the vision and values of Huffman Baptist Church, but they have not yet joined Huffman Baptist Church. This includes some adults. In fact, there's some who fall into this category that, quite honestly, when I was going through, I was like, I thought she was a church member. I thought he was a church member. I had no idea that they've never actually joined the church. Many of you, some of you sitting in the room right now, I'll try not to make eye contact with you, but I know who you are. But yet you're engaged with the vision and values of the church. You're here. So it includes those folks, but it also includes children and students and preschoolers who are not yet at the point of their lives where they're willing and ready to give their lives to Christ and follow in church membership. In 2023, we'll continue to offer well, actually, let me back up a minute, because I want you to understand the significance of this group in our overall picture. So on any given Sunday, if you take the average attendance of all of our Sunday school classes and then include all the people who come for worship but who don't show up in Sunday school, there are about 150 people who fall into that category on any given Sunday here at Huffman Baptist. Now, we don't always see that in this room because many of them are downstairs in the children's building. But there are about 150 on any given Sunday. 20% of that number are folks who are engaged with the vision and values of Huffman Baptist Church, but they are not yet members of Huffman Baptist. And look, I want to say, honestly, I want to say to each of you, I'm not going to put pressure on you to make that decision. That's not for me to do. That's between you and God. And you move at your own pace. You move at the pace that God tells you to move. We're going to love you while you're here. We're going to invest in you while you're here. We're going to engage with you while you're here for whatever season that is. And you do what you feel like God's telling you to do at the time God tells you to do it. But we're going to continue to offer our Discover Huffman Lunch and Learn, the seminar that we do after church. We'll do that a couple of times in the next year. I believe that's going to be necessary, but we'll also move from just having it as a seminar, because as people begin to come, we don't want to have to wait until 3 months and we got a group large enough to do the seminar. There may be some one-on-one with a staff member in going through that. The purpose of that is to give you the opportunity to learn about who we are as a church family, and for you then to decide how you can serve and be served going forward. And so, you look at this group right here, from the core to the committed to the congregation. If you add everybody up who falls into that category, it's about 175 people. On any given Sunday, it's about 150 who are here. That's incredible. I didn't know until I actually got in and started looking. Yeah. I had no idea. Had no idea that it was that large. By the way, I know comparing to where we've been in the past, that's really not that large. But do you know that makes just that little bitty group, that 150 or so people, that makes Huffman Baptist Church one of the largest churches in the entire United States. We think of big churches as like 2,000. They make up 4%. 4% of all of the churches in North America. It's small churches. It's medium-sized, normal-sized churches. Love it. With all these wonderful people, church members, regular attenders, we're moving forward to this community. A year ago, with the exception of a few Kingdom kids, we had no real community beyond members and regular attenders. But today, with Banks Academy faculty and staff and students, Kingdom Kids, Elevate, Young Life, our community has grown by about 150 souls. So today, our community of faith, that larger community of faith, as I said earlier, more than 425 people. We spent most of this past year developing relationships, building trust, laying the groundwork for making disciples within our community. You've heard a little bit about that this morning from the interviews with Caleb and Nicole and Bill. Our goal is to make disciples who gather, grow, and go to make Jesus known across the street and around the world. Some of the people who fall into this category, and by the way, we're all part of this community, but some of the new people, specifically as we look at kids and families with Banks Academy, some of them are committed members of other churches. But we still believe God's given us a responsibility to make disciples. As Caleb shared, some of their churches they don't have a student ministry. So we believe we have a responsibility to provide a student ministry. And you know what? If they grow in their faith, become more like Jesus, and go back to their church where they have a membership, and they make that church even better, to God be the glory. Amen. We've done what we're supposed to do. Some of these folks are disengaged members of other churches. And if by our work they begin to grow as disciples of Jesus and they go back and get active in the church that they previously were disengaged in, you know what? To God be the glory. Some of the folks in our community don't have a relationship with Jesus or a church to call home. If by our work they find a local church and join somewhere away from 700 Huffman Road, you know what? To God be the glory. This is a kingdom focus. But some of the disengaged church members and some of the people who don't have a relationship with Jesus are likely to join a church that meets at 700 Huffman Road. And yes, I said it that way on purpose. Because as you know, there are two churches that meet at 700 Huffman Road. Huffman Baptist and Kingdom Family. And if they join one of those two churches, to God be the glory. Remember, our definition of a disciple is someone who gathers for community and worship, who is growing in the grace and knowledge of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and who is going to make Jesus known across the street and around the world. Last week I called this the city. Remember? I put in that category the city, that we're going to the city. I was stuck on that having to be a C. But as I thought about it this week, I was like, no, it's not just the city. It's what we've been saying from the very beginning, that we are called to send transformed people to make Jesus known across the street and around the world. And so we are sent across the street. I also moved the arrow up a little bit, and I brought it back because it's not the core that is called to go across the street. It's the entire community of faith that we are called to lead across the street and around the world to make Jesus known. This next year, we're going to continue and possibly improve many of the things that we've done in the past few years. Pray and Go, food distribution, community events, and so forth. We've already talked about, Nicole talking about a clothing ministry added to that. This spring, we're going to have the opportunity to be a part of an inaugural cohort of churches that are participating in something called the Hope Initiative. Through our ongoing partnership with Tom Rayner and the team at Church Answers, we have access to this incredible resource that is literally being designed as we speak. They're still working on the finished product. But the purpose of this is to build an evangelism culture within the local church. And we'll start with the staff. We'll walk through the process, and then we'll expand that out to our deacons and other core leadership, ultimately to our entire faith community, as we build an evangelistic culture here at 700 Huffman Road. It's going to be fantastic. One more thing before I get ready to close about our making Jesus known across the street and around the world. 3 years ago when I stood before you and unveiled the next chapter vision, within that next chapter vision was a goal that we would set relationships with one North American Mission Board church planter and one International Mission Board missionary currently serving on the field, that we would partner with them in a relationship specifically with those. We've not been able to do that to this point. By the end of this year, we will have done that. We will make that a reality. And God willing, they will then be able to come and be with us next year at our Global Impact celebration, which we will have next week. But also within that next chapter vision was the idea that we would take a group of church members from Huffman Baptist Church on a mission trip to work with that North American Mission Board church planter. By the end of this year, we will either have done that or have plans in place to do it in the following year. Church, God is doing incredible things. Amen. God is on the move, and He's invited us to go with Him. You know, Henry Blackaby is the one who helped us to see the idea that God is at work around us. And when we see that God is at work around us, that is His invitation to join Him in that work. But the thing that we often leave out of that is that God doesn't just say, I want you to join me in what I'm doing. There's another step in there. We have to adjust our lives in order to join God in what He is doing. Church, you have shown an incredible ability to make those adjustments. It's right in front of us. Don't sit down and let the rest of us go to the top. Don't be a vision casualty. Hang in there. We've done the hard work. Let's enjoy the fruit. Father, I thank you for a church that has been willing to move forward. God, as we take these next steps, God, would you lead us? And Lord, if anything that I've shared here this morning is different than what you desire for Huffman Baptist Church, God, would you show us? Indeed, God, would you keep us? Because we only want to step where you have stepped before us. Lord, we surrender everything that we have, everything that we are, to this journey. In Jesus' name.